Welcome back to StartupHakk. I'm Spencer Thomason, and here at StartupHakk, we love to train software developers in our coding bootcamp and build custom software solutions. So I do a lot of work as a fractional CTO, and with over a decade of executive leadership experience and a solid 25 years in software development, I've mastered the art of transforming technology, teams, and products. Now, today we're going to dive into a new report that's come out that I got a hold of last week that I found was really interesting and a really good run through on where we're at with the job market, what we can expect, and I think some things about what we can find about what we've learned from history and what this report's going to tell us about where we're at in the market and hopefully when we'll see an end of this. So let's dive into this report today. All right, so let's jump into this report. Now, I've been really interested in, and I've been trying to stay in touch with the tech market a lot over the last couple of years. As I've talked about before, I started originally before in the run-up to the dot-com boom, and I just started with working with local electric company, so there wasn't a lot of effect for me, and especially I didn't feel like here in the Phoenix area where I was at the time that we felt a ton from the dot-com bubble. Obviously in Silicon Valley, Seattle, a lot of other places. There was a lot of other places that definitely felt that run-up, but I was still enough of a part of it that I felt the run-up and the run-down of the dot-com bubble. A lot of people are talking about a lot of similarities of this, and this report will actually go into a lot of this too. And so I think as we dig into this, it's interesting to take these, learn from these lessons of history, and to try to figure out when we're going to see, hopefully, a change into the market. So let's jump into this report now. All right, so I'll switch over here. So first of all, he digs into kind of what's going on. So now in this job market, he talks about this is the author of The Pragmatic Engineer. And so he's digging in, and I'm going to put the link down into the feed after the live after this. So he talks about that if you're a hiring manager, towards the end of 2021, it was absolutely crazy. And I ran into this too. I was trying to scale up a team at the time, and truly, you could not get your hands onto developers. I think at one point our team, which was across the whole broader company, had about 50 developers, and we had 8 open job for developers and job postings for job developers. You just literally couldn't get your hands on them. And I remember hiring one kid out of top 30 CS programs. And the kid, we were in a bidding war for him because he was decent, because he was a decent candidate. He was a smart kid, but he had almost no coding experience, and we still had to pay this kid $120,000 a year in order to get him, plus all the benefits of a full large company. And so during that, there was kind of this perfect storm of the hiring jobs, and I want to kind of dig into this this graph here that he's got, and move my head out of the way here a little bit. And so what he's showing here is he's showing that we can see that in 2023, we can see this run up where during 2021 there was no layoffs. There was people literally could not get jobs enough, and this Q2 of 2020 is obviously COVID, right? There was a lot of companies that kind of panicked did layoffs. We saw a lot of layoffs during that time, but mostly it was all around COVID. And then we started to see stimulus funds come in, and we started to see everything through 2021 where we saw this crazy tech hiring. And so in the fall of 2022, we saw big cuts, so we ramp up at 2022, we started to see big cuts. And one of the first ones to really, dive into this was when even companies like Meta started to say, hey, look, we've got to start focusing on efficiencies. And because you can see that there's this unhealthily low amount in end of 2020 and end of 2021 of layoffs. Layoffs are a natural part of things, right? You're going to have layoffs as companies need to right size, projects let go, etc. But the problem that we saw here is then we saw where it just became ultra popular, where we saw employees laying off and this ratio of companies to employees. And, there was this huge spike through 2020, 2022 and into 2023, right? And we saw a lot of this. Now, one of the corresponding relationships that he's pointing to here, he talks about the VC funding that we saw in 2021, right? So VC funding in 2021, I can't seem to get my head out of the way here. VC funding in 2021 really went crazy. As VCs, I think the money was free. We see almost no interest rates. Interest rates are almost at a zero that I'm going to show you here in a minute. And we see VC funding go crazy, right? One of the highest levels of VC funding we've seen in a long time. Now, since then, we've obviously seen it start to fall. Now, in 2021, we also saw some really large public offerings, these IPOs, right? So throughout through 2021, we saw a ton of public offerings, and this allowed a lot more money to come back into that, right? And so some of these public offerings that we saw were GitLab, Rivian, Affirm, Bumble, Robinhood. We saw a lot of these, run through, and all of these have some level of tech, right? And so we saw a lot of IPO here. We then saw the quarterly VC exit, right? So this is actually where we start to see the VC exit valuation by type. So in 2021 versus 2023, this is a staggering amount, right? The big tech giants did large layoffs early in 2023, which were justified with the claim that they'd overhired during the pandemic. Surprise. So I've said it before, it's kind of like everybody knew it was like a game of Survivor. They were going to staff up. They're always the weak ones or the first ones get voted off. And then they continued to trim down and trim down and trim down. And so what was really unique about this versus other times in the market that we've seen this is at other points in the market, it has always been unpopular to do layoffs. What we're seeing here that's so unique is we're seeing that it's becoming a positive. Like people are looking at it as, oh, these companies are becoming more efficient. And I think this is because of this terrible, buy now, pay later that these companies were able to do. And we'll kind of dig into that a little bit. So, wrapping up this whole part here, what's going on is VCs are funding less. IPOs are almost non-existent since this big IPO ramp up that we saw, right? We saw this huge ramp up of IPOs in 2021. And since then, we haven't seen hardly any. And so IPOs are next to nothing. Big techs are getting record profits, but they're still laying off. And again, that's what I was talking about a second ago, and it's made for a tougher job market for technology. No one's really starting big projects right now, and we're going to go into a little bit of why this is happening today. So, this is an article from, June of 2022. Feds deliver biggest interest rate hike in decades to combat surging inflation. So when inflation was as high as 9%, Feds had to do something. So what did they do? They jacked up interest rates, right? And I'm not going to go a ton into what are interest rates. Hopefully you kind of know what interest rates are. But I think this graph is super, super, super telling, right? We went from this literally near zero. I mean, it says basically zero. At one point, I think there might have even been some kind of a negative interest rate that you could have possibly, the large banks and stuff could have gotten. And then within a year, jumped to a 5% interest rate. Now, why does this matter? Why do interest rates matter? And I'm just going to go through this a little bit. And so let's look at this longer curve one, right? So last time we saw interest rates do something like this, we saw interest rates start to climb up as we, saw a little bit of climb, and then they dropped because of, all of the free pandemic money that came in here, right? So interest rates really just dropped to next to zero. They were trying to keep the economy alive through COVID. And then they had to just fix inflation because obviously this would have been a more natural curve if you could kind of connect these two, right? And so all of this down here in the middle is where we see a negative interest rate. And so essentially this was all fake. This was all fake money that was pumped and inflated into the economy. And so that's why we saw this ramp up, right? We might have been able to see this come up and level off, and we might have been able to manage it differently. But because of this, we've seen that for so long, interest rates were so low. Then we saw this crazy, unnatural period of low interest rates, and that's why it had to run up so high and so hard. That's the biggest difference here, is how hard that had to run up, right? And so, this graph is eye-opening, as he says, dating back to 2009, interest rate was close to zero, and then between 17 and 19, it climbed around 2%, and that's fairly normal and natural. we start to combat inflation, and inflation starts to go with, a busy economy and a lot of other things. And so it's not super uncommon to need to combat inflation with raising interest rates a little. But then to spike them to 5%, that is bonkers. So we can definitely see, through the night, we saw a lot of interest rates, and this is over, the period of time, right? Get my head out of the way again. And so from 1955, you can see that interest rates have bounced around, right? It's very common for interest rates. But we've seen this low period for so long as we've tried to combat, and this was post, 2008, 2009. And so with the government, doing this, and then big money, I think a lot of this we're seeing is a globalization of technology, and the globalization of money, I think, is a lot of a cause for this. But you can see when interest rates were out of control in the early 80s, right? And since then, we've had periods of low and high interest rates. But to come back to this high interest rate for so long, and so remember that technology as a sector didn't really start to exist until the late late 90s was when technology really kind of became a first thing. And so he's going through, he does a really good job of breaking this through. He says, look, this low point was 2 months. This low point was 2 months. This low point was 9 years. And this low point was 2 years, right? And so in 2010's the zero interest rate period, or a ZIRP, which is a zero interest rate period, really went on for almost 10 years, right? So we've had this long time of low interest rates. So since 1995 or 1955, there's been a total of 11.5 years of ultra low near zero interest rates, 11 of those which occurred after 2009, and that's why it's known as the zero interest rate period. He goes through a ton of other details, but I'm not going to go super deep into that. Again, I'll put the article down below, so if you really want to dig into those, you can. But what's the impact? And this is the part that's really what I'm trying to get to, is what is the impact of these low interest rates? Of the low to high swing of interest rates. So it's tempting to assume everybody in technology that it's unconnected from finance. It couldn't be further from the truth. As a business owner, as somebody who's worked with management, startups are a low interest rate phenomenon. When interest rates are low everywhere, $1 in 20 years is about as good as $1 today. So a startup whose business model is we'll lose money for a decade building artificial intelligence and then rake in lots of money in the far future sounds pretty good. When interest rates are high, $1 today is better than $1 tomorrow, so investors want cash flow. And so I think this is really kind of the key to this. If charismatic tech founders had come to you, to the bank, in 2021 and said, I'm going to revolutionize the world via artificial inflation, robo-taxis, etc., it might have felt unnatural to reply, nah, but when the Fed rates, nah, but what if the Fed raises rates by 25%? That was an industry with a radical vision for the future of humanity and not a bet on interest rates. So it turns out it was a bet on interest rates, though. And that's really what he's going to here. So what happens when interest rates go up like this? And that's what we're seeing here, right? There's less VC funding. VCs, if interest rates are high, they're not going to want to put them into these startups. There's going to be fewer tech IPOs. Tech companies going public are generally loss-making as they're still in growth mode. Majority of tech companies go public in 2021 were in this category. In a high interest rate environment, investing in them is less tempting. Big tech profit push, right? So during a ZIRP, the baseline returns to zero. When this baseline rises 5%, profitable companies need a higher profit ratio in order to maintain their valuation. This means big tech cuts more aggressively in order to make their profits look better, even if they're already very profitable. And that's, I think, a lot of what we're seeing here. I think we're seeing a ton of companies who need to look more profitable, and that's why they're really pushing it. So as we continue to build technology, in some way we're building our own demise in some ways, because as we push the technology, people are continuing to think that technology is going to improve efficiencies, and it will, right? We're seeing it over and over again. And yet I think we're seeing too rapid of a push to it. McDonald's had to roll back their AI order taking, right? People are already taking to things too much. I'm going to do a live here this week sometime on some of the struggles I've had with AI, and I've got some great examples. And I'm reading things about AI is going to take over jobs, and I'm thinking, AI is going to be in changing efficiencies, but it's not going to be overall. Um, and so, what impact, so with VC funding, there's less and less, IPOs fewer and fewer, big tech, cut cost, cut cost, cut cost, and the job market gets tougher and tougher. So, then we see the smartphone and the cloud revolution, right? And so this is kind of going back into history. So, the drop in interest rates from 2009 drove more venture capital in startups because VC investing is more attractive when interest rates are at rock bottom. So we saw the smartphone revolution. A lot of this came out of that zero interest rate, right, that we were seeing through this period of the graph, right? So this period of the graph here, we saw the smartphone growth happen, right? We also saw, the cloud revolution. This is where we saw AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and obviously those were hugely expensive things to start up. Money was cheap, right? They could invest in heavy in R&D. And through a lot of this, right, so you see, and that's where he lays out, and this is very fascinating, right? You see the iPhone launch, right? We see the iPhone AWS launch, we see the iPhone, right? And so we see this rise at the cloud computing and smartphone launch, right? So, he goes on to make a lot of these, and then now he's talking about what is the new reality. And the new reality is that companies are going to be pushing for efficiencies. For engineering practices, we likely see a push to choose boring technology. Monoliths become more popular. Full stack and TypeScript gain momentum, and more responsibilities of shift left onto developers, right? So is history repeating? And that's really the overall big question here, is are we seeing history repeating? And I think we are. I think we've seen this with the dot-com bust. I think we've seen this every time we see interest rates go up, development goes down. Development is a nice to have when you can invest in a 10 to 20 year bet. R&D is super expensive. Developers are expensive. Now, development doesn't go away because people still have to maintain these large projects. And I think they will continue to. And I think there's a lot of projects that are sitting on the shelf. And here at StartupHakk, we do a lot of consulting for people. And we're getting a lot of interest in our consulting because people don't want to invest in full time. They don't want to put that on those line items. They want to invest into contractors and dig into and have contractors dig into this. So really, ultimately, some of his takeaways is to help zoom out. Remember that we're going to have to ride this out. Interest rates don't always stay high. They rarely stay high for long. And essentially, and especially since we've seen a lot of those interest rates sit in those ranges for a long time, I think and my take on this is a lot of what we've seen with those low interest rates have been as we've seen an increase in globalization of money and finances. We've also seen an increase in globalization of technology. And I think as we've seen the globalization of these, I think we're going to continue to see technology, continue to thrive. I think it will grow. I think you will see some technology continue to go. I don't think it's going to just completely die. I don't think technology can totally die. And so I think as we continue to see the technology grow, and I think as we see interest rates, there's a lot of talk of interest rates starting to peak off this year. I don't think we're going to have to see it go back to zero. I think the market's been bottled up for long enough at this point. People are impatient. And I think a lot of people want to start to build on top of AI. I think AI is an interesting new tool in the toolbox that a lot of companies are interested to start to build on top of. And here at StartupHakk, we do a lot of AI consulting where we consult on how to use AI in your technology. And so I think this is a season where we're seeing, but people want to see efficiency. They want to be able to see, I think gone are the days of, hey, we're going to build this 5-year project for you. I think people want to see turnaround in 6 to 12 to 18 months on projects. I think gone are the days of huge, multi-team developments. I think we're seeing leaner and leaner teams, and I think technology is helping with that. When I first started CleanRouter in 2009, one of the first things that we were trying to solve was how to get enough server power. That problem's solved now. I don't need technology I don't need staff and people to solve that technology or to solve that problem. Technology is already solved for that. And I think we're going to continue to see that with AI and a lot of these other new tools that we have coming. So, as always, make sure you leave a comment. I love to hear from you guys. Make sure you also like and subscribe, share the channel. I'm going to try to do some more of these lives where I get on and bring interesting stuff to you guys and see what I can help to help you guys. If you're struggling out there looking for a job, my advice at this point as a 25-year veteran in the technology industry is hang out there, do your best, go and get pretty much whatever job you can get. Continue to build your technology skills. That's a huge part, as I see a lot of developers who may be sitting on the sideline right now and are struggling, and instead they aren't doing everything to help themselves. So make sure that you're really digging in and diving into the latest technologies, learn new technologies, and so that you can diversify. And as always, make sure we bring a lot of good coding samples and things here. I have hundreds of videos with hundreds of different code samples. Dig into a lot of those. Those will keep you relevant on your skill set. And so, as always, make sure you like and subscribe, and we will bring you guys another recording later this week.